There are two kinds of people who pray. The first kind says a few words before meals, whispers a quick request in times of trouble, and then wonders why nothing seems to change. They see prayer as a ritual, a duty to be performed, but not a force to be reckoned with. The second kind, now they are different. They pray as if heaven itself is leaning in to listen. They pray as if the very ground beneath their feet might shake with the power of their words. They do not just pray, they pray with power. Now, let me ask you, which kind are you? Some people think prayer is like sending a letter without expecting a reply. Others know that prayer is like knocking on a door until it opens. Which do you think is more effective? When a man truly prays, he does not simply repeat words. He does not approach God as if he were a distant official behind a locked door. No, he comes boldly, like a child approaching his father, like a soldier calling for reinforcements, like a traveler knocking until the door swings wide. Weak prayers are timid, they are uncertain, they sound like this: Lord, if it is not too much trouble, if you have time, if you are willing, perhaps maybe, could you help? But tell me, does a child beg his father for bread with such uncertainty? No, a child simply asks because he knows his father loves him. So why do we hesitate? Why do we pray as if we are unsure whether God is listening? Let me be clear. Prayer is not magic. It is not about twisting God's arm to get what we want. No, real prayer is about transforming us. It is about aligning our hearts with His will. It is about stepping into the power that He has already given us, but that we so often fail to use. If you truly wish to pray with power, then pray with faith. Pray with expectation. Pray with persistence. And most of all, pray knowing that you are not speaking to empty air, but to a God who hears, who acts, and who moves. So, do not just pray, pray with power. And watch what happens when heaven responds. Prayer is often misunderstood as simply the act of speaking words to God, as if the mere formation of sentences is what makes it effective. But true prayer is not about the words themselves. It is about the faith behind them and the action that follows. Many people believe that if they just say the right words in the right order, their prayers will be answered. However, prayer is not a ritual or a formula. It is a living connection between the human soul and God. Without faith, prayer becomes an empty routine. And without action, it remains a passive wish, rather than a force that changes lives. Consider the way people approach prayer in everyday life. Some pray out of habit, reciting words mechanically without real engagement. They say their prayers in the morning or before meals, but their hearts are not truly involved. They speak, but they do not expect an answer. They repeat phrases they have learned, but do not pause to reflect on the meaning behind them. This kind of prayer, though common, lacks power because it is disconnected from faith. True prayer is not about saying the right words. It is about believing that those words carry weight and that God hears and responds. Faith is the foundation of powerful prayer. When a person prays with faith, they are not just speaking into the air, they are approaching God with confidence, knowing that He is listening. Faith transforms prayer from a wish into an act of trust. It is the difference between a person who prays timidly, unsure if anything will happen, and a person who prays boldly, expecting God to move. Faith is not about forcing God to act, but about aligning oneself with His power. When Jesus spoke about prayer, He emphasized faith repeatedly. He told His disciples that if they had faith even the size of a mustard seed, they could move mountains. This was not just a poetic expression, it was a profound truth about the nature of faith-filled prayer. However, faith is not merely believing that something might happen, it is acting as if it will. Many people pray for change but do nothing to prepare for it. They ask God for opportunities but do not position themselves to receive them. They pray for strength but continue to live in fear. They pray for healing but do not take steps toward recovery. True faith leads to action. A farmer who prays for rain does not sit idly by. He prepares his fields, knowing that the rain will come. A person who prays for wisdom does not simply wait for knowledge to fall from the sky. They seek understanding, study, and listen. This connection between faith and action is seen throughout history. Those who have prayed with true faith did not simply wait for miracles. They stepped forward in obedience. When Moses stood before the Red Sea with the Egyptian army behind him, he did not merely pray for deliverance. He stretched out his staff in faith, and the waters parted. When David faced Goliath, he did not just pray for victory. He ran toward the giant with a stone in hand. When the disciples were caught in a storm, they did not just pray for calm. They turned to Jesus, who rebuked the wind and the waves. These examples show that prayer is not passive. It is an invitation to act in faith. Many people struggle with unanswered prayers, wondering why their words seem to go unheard. Often, it is not that God is silent, but that he is waiting for faith to be demonstrated through action. A person who prays for a job but never applies for one is not praying with faith. A person who prays for reconciliation in a broken relationship but refuses to take the first step toward forgiveness is not praying with faith. Prayer without faith is like planting a seed but never watering it. It remains dormant, never growing into what it was meant to be. Prayer is meant to transform the one who prays. It is not about changing God's mind. It is about changing our hearts. When a person prays sincerely, they do not simply ask for things. They align themselves with God's will. They begin to see situations differently, to think differently. A person who prays for patience will find themselves in situations where patience is tested. A person who prays for courage will find themselves facing challenges that require bravery. Prayer is not a magic formula that makes life easier. It is a spiritual discipline that strengthens and refines the soul. True prayer requires persistence. Many people pray once, and when nothing happens immediately, they assume that their prayer was ineffective. But faithful's prayer does not give up. It continues even when there is no immediate answer. It holds on, trusting that God's timing is perfect. Jesus told the parable of a widow who kept coming to a judge asking for justice. Though the judge was unwilling at first, he eventually granted her request because of her persistence. Jesus used this story to illustrate that persistent prayer is powerful. It is not about wearing God down, but about demonstrating true dependence on him. Prayer also requires surrender. There is a difference between praying for what we want and praying for what is truly best. Many people come to God with a list of demands, treating him like a vending machine. But true prayer is not about getting what we want. It is about aligning ourselves with what is right. Jesus himself demonstrated this in the Garden of Gethsemane. Faced with suffering, he prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." This is the highest form of prayer, not just asking for what we desire, but trusting that God's plan is greater. Another important aspect of prayer is gratitude. Many people pray only when they need something, forgetting to give thanks for what they have already received. Gratitude in prayer strengthens faith because it shifts focus from what is lacking to what has already been provided. A person who thanks God for past blessings is more likely to trust him for future ones. Gratitude transforms prayer from a list of requests into a relationship of trust. Prayer should also be specific. Vague prayers often reflect a lack of true engagement. Instead of praying general prayers like "bless me" or "help me," a person should pray with clarity and purpose. A person who prays specifically is more likely to recognize the answer when it comes. If someone prays for guidance, they should be attentive to opportunities and wisdom that come their way. If someone prays for strength, they should look for ways in which they are being challenged to grow stronger. Ultimately, prayer is not about changing circumstances alone. It is about changing the one who prays. It deepens faith, strengthens character, and draws a person closer to God. It is not about the mere repetition of words, but about a heart that truly believes and a life that responds in action. When prayer is combined with faith and action, it becomes a force that moves mountains, transforms lives, and brings real change. Those who truly understand prayer do not just speak, they believe, they act, and they see the power of God at work in their lives. Prayer is often thought of as a quiet, gentle act, something done in solitude with whispered words. But true prayer is not meant to be weak or uncertain. It is meant to be bold, confident, and full of faith. Many people approach prayer as if they are unsure whether God is listening or willing to answer. They pray timidly with hesitation as if they are bothering God with their requests. This kind of prayer lacks power because it is rooted in doubt rather than faith. Prayer is not about speaking carefully measured words. It is about coming before God with full confidence, knowing that He hears, that He cares, and that He is able to respond. When a person prays boldly, they do not approach God as if they are a beggar at the gates of a king. They approach Him as a child speaks to a loving father. A child does not wonder whether his father will listen. He knows he will. A child does not hesitate to ask for what he needs. He asks directly, knowing that his Father delights in giving good things. This is how prayer should be. It is not about pleading for small mercies, but about coming to God with the certainty that He desires to act. Bold prayer is not arrogant. It is the kind of prayer that acknowledges God's power and goodness. It is not about demanding things from God, but about trusting Him enough to ask for the impossible. In Scripture, bold prayer is seen again and again. When Elijah prayed for fire to fall from heaven, he did not pray with uncertainty. He stood before the people, called on God, and expected an answer. When Joshua prayed for the sun to stand still, he did not pray with hesitation. He commanded the sun to stop, believing that God would honor his faith. When Jesus stood before the tomb of Lazarus, he did not whisper a timid request. He spoke with authority, calling Lazarus forth as if death itself had no power. These were not men who prayed timidly. They knew who they were speaking to, and they knew that when they prayed, something would happen. Many people pray small prayers because they are afraid of disappointment. They do not ask for great things because they do not want to risk the possibility that their prayer will not be answered. But this kind of fear limits prayer before it even begins. A person who prays timidly is already doubting before they have finished speaking. They ask, but they do not truly expect to receive. They knock on the door, but do not wait for it to open. They speak, but their hearts are filled with uncertainty. This is why so many prayers go unanswered, not because God is unwilling to respond, but because the person praying does not truly believe. Prayer should be bold because God has already invited His people to come to Him with confidence. In the Scriptures, believers are told to approach the throne of grace boldly, to ask and they shall receive, to seek and they shall find, to knock and the door will be opened. These are not weak statements, they are declarations of certainty. Yet many people do not take them seriously. They pray as if they are trying to convince God to listen, rather than recognizing that He is already waiting. Bold prayer does not mean demanding things from God as if He were a servant. It means praying with the deep conviction that He is a God who acts, who moves, and who delights in answering prayer. A bold prayer is one that refuses to be discouraged. Many people pray once and when they do not see an immediate result, they give up. But bold prayer is persistent. It does not stop at the first sign of delay. It continues, pressing forward, knowing that answers do not always come instantly. In the Scriptures, there is the story of a widow who went to a judge seeking justice. She kept coming again and again until the judge finally granted her request. Jesus used this as an example of how people should pray, not giving up, not losing heart, but continuing to ask until the answer comes. Bold prayer does not waver because it is rooted in trust, not in circumstances. It does not rely on feelings, but on faith. People who pray boldly are not afraid to ask for great things. They do not limit their prayers to what seems possible. They ask for what seems impossible, knowing that God is greater than any obstacle. When a person prays boldly, they are not praying based on their own ability or resources. They are praying with the understanding that God's power is beyond human limitations. A timid prayer looks at the size of the problem. A bold prayer looks at the size of God. Fear is one of the biggest barriers to bold prayer. Many people are afraid to ask for too much because they worry about what will happen if they do not receive it. They think that if they pray boldly and nothing happens, their faith will be shaken. But true faith is not about getting what one wants every time. It is about trusting in God's wisdom even when the answer is different from what was expected. Bold prayer does not mean that a person always gets exactly what they ask for, but it means they pray without hesitation, knowing that God will always respond in the way that is best. A person who prays boldly also prays specifically. Instead of vague prayers like bless me or help me, bold prayers are clear, direct, and full of expectation. When blind Bartimaeus called out to Jesus, He did not simply ask for a blessing. He shouted, "Lord, I want to see." His prayer was not timid or hesitant. It was specific, urgent, and filled with faith. Jesus heard him, stopped, and restored his sight. Many people pray in vague terms because they are not sure if God will answer. But a bold prayer is one that knows exactly what is needed and asks for it without fear. Another sign of bold prayer is the willingness to act. A person who prays boldly does not just wait for an answer, they step forward in faith. When Peter saw Jesus walking on water, he did not just pray to join him. He stepped out of the boat. His prayer was not just words, it was action. Many people pray but do not move. They ask for opportunities but do not prepare for them. They ask for strength but do not take steps toward growth. Bold prayer is not passive, it is active. It does not just wait for an answer, it walks forward, believing that the answer is already on the way. The way a person prays reflects what they truly believe about God. If they pray with hesitation, it means they are not sure if God is listening. If they pray with uncertainty, it means they do not fully trust His power. But if they pray boldly, it means they know without a doubt that God is present, that He hears, and that He is able. This is the kind of prayer that moves mountains, that shakes the heavens, that changes lives. Those who truly understand prayer do not whisper weak requests. They lift their voices in confidence, knowing that they are speaking to a God who is ready to act. Many people approach prayer as if it is a tool to persuade God to do what they want. They think of it as a way to change His mind, to convince Him to act in their favor, or to adjust His plans to match their desires. This misunderstanding turns prayer into a negotiation, as if God must be persuaded or reminded to be good, wise, and just. But true prayer is not about changing God, it is about changing us. It is not about bringing God into alignment with our will, but about bringing our hearts into alignment with His. God does not change. He is eternal, unshaken, and perfect in all His ways. If He were inconsistent, He would not be trustworthy. People, on the other hand, are constantly changing, growing, and struggling with limited understanding. When a person prays, they are not informing God of something He does not already know. They are not presenting Him with new ideas or persuading Him to reconsider His plans. Prayer is not about making God more willing to act. It is about making ourselves more willing to listen, trust, and follow. When a person truly prays, they begin to see things differently. Before prayer, they may be filled with anxiety, frustration, or confusion. They may be focused on their problems and their own desires. But as they pray, their perspective shifts. They begin to see that their worries are small in comparison to God's greatness. They realize that their desires may not always be what is best. They start to understand that what they thought was a problem may actually be an opportunity for growth. This transformation does not happen because God has changed, but because the person praying has been changed. Prayer is an act of surrender. Many people come to God with a list of requests, expecting Him to grant them like a wish-granting genie. But true prayer is not about getting what we want. It is about trusting that God knows what is best. When Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, He expressed His human desire, "Let this cup pass from me." But He did not stop there. He continued, "Yet not my will but yours be done." This is the heart of true prayer, not trying to change God's plan, but submitting to it. People often think that if they pray enough or say the right words, they can change God's decision. But God is not like people, who can be convinced or manipulated. He is not swayed by clever arguments or emotional appeals. He sees the full picture while people only see a small part. When a child asks for something dangerous, a loving parent does not grant the request simply because the child asks repeatedly. Instead, the parent acts in the child's best interest, even if the child does not understand. In the same way, God's answers to prayer are not based on how hard we pray, but on what is truly good for us. Prayer changes us by deepening our trust. When a person prays and does not immediately receive what they asked for, they are faced with a choice. They can either become frustrated and doubtful, or they can trust that God's timing and wisdom are greater than their own. Faith grows when a person learns to trust even when the answer is delayed or different from what they expected. The more a person prays, the more they learn that God's ways are higher than their ways. Prayer also changes a person's desires. Many people begin by praying for what they think they need, only to realize later that their desires were misguided. They may pray for success in a certain job, only to later find a different path that is better for them. They may pray for a relationship to work out, only to realize that God had someone better in store. Over time, as a person prays, their heart begins to align with God's heart. They stop praying for things that only serve their own comfort or ambition and start praying for things that truly matter: wisdom, character, and a deeper relationship with God. Another way prayer changes people is by softening their hearts. A person who prays for their enemies will find it difficult to continue hating them. A person who prays for patience will begin to notice opportunities to practice it. A person who prays for strength will find themselves growing through trials. Prayer does not always change the situation immediately, but it changes the person facing the situation. Prayer also teaches humility. Many people pray when they are desperate, realizing that they cannot fix their problems alone. In those moments, they acknowledge their dependence on God. This humility is a powerful transformation. Instead of relying on their own strength, they learn to lean on God's wisdom and guidance. A proud person believes they can handle everything on their own. A prayerful person recognizes their need for God. Another important change that happens through prayer is a shift from complaining to gratitude. Many people spend their lives focusing on what they lack, always asking for more. But prayer opens their eyes to what they already have. When a person takes time to thank God in prayer, their entire outlook changes. They begin to see blessings where they once saw burdens. They realize that even in difficult times, there is still much to be grateful for. Prayer also strengthens character. A person who prays for wisdom will grow in discernment. A person who prays for self-control will begin to develop discipline. A person who prays for courage will find themselves becoming braver. These changes do not happen instantly, but over time, as a person continues in prayer, they become transformed. One of the greatest changes that happens through prayer is a shift from selfishness to selflessness. Many people begin by praying for their own needs and wants, but as they grow in prayer, they begin to pray for others. They start to care more about the struggles of their family, their friends, their community, and even people they do not know. Instead of only asking for personal blessings, they begin to intercede for the world around them. This change in focus is one of the clearest signs that prayer is doing its true work. Prayer also brings peace. Many people come to prayer with heavy hearts, carrying burdens of worry, anger, or fear, but through prayer they find release. They realize that they do not have to carry everything alone. They learn to cast their burdens onto God, trusting that He will sustain them. This peace does not always come from the situation changing, but from the person changing. They move from anxiety to trust, from restlessness to calm, from despair to hope. When people think of prayer as a way to change God, they misunderstand its true purpose. Prayer is not about bending God's will to match human desires. It is about transforming the human heart to align with God's will. It is a process of growth, trust, surrender, and transformation. Over time, those who pray consistently begin to reflect God's character. They become more patient, more loving, more humble, and more faithful. They learn to pray not just for their own benefit, but for the good of others. They stop seeing prayer as a way to get what they want and start seeing it as a way to become who they were meant to be.